What's up, everybody? Welcome to Make Things Tiny. My name is Mick. So there are a lot of different ways to go tiny. One of the ways we haven't talked about is by purchasing a tiny home kit online. There's a company that's made headlines for selling tiny home kits. We're going to talk about whether or not this particular story would count as a scam, and make sure you watch to the end because I'm going to talk about whether or not this type of potential scam is even avoidable. If you're new to the channel, please take time to subscribe and let's talk about tiny home kits. Alright, welcome back. I've got my notes. We've got a recent headline about a tiny home kit company that was taking people's money and didn't deliver the kit. Now, the reason why I want to talk about this particular case or story, if you will, is because it covers a different section of the tiny house market. So when I've talked about tiny house potential scams or issues within the industry before, we're talking about a pretty traditional tiny house buying process where you see it, you go through the design phase, you pick a model, you meet the builder, you talk to the builder. There's a lot of different stages where you give them money. But in this particular market, in this particular sector of the market, the online space, you're just giving someone money and then hoping they return it to you. So if we look at the industry as a whole, let's pretend there's only 3 sectors to this industry, just for simplicity. So you have the traditional building market, you have the DIY market where you would just go to Home Depot, buy all the materials yourself. And now today we're talking about that online space where you can buy plans online. So there's different websites you can go to buy the plans for your tiny home. And this particular topic we're talking about is the kits themselves. So in this case, there's not as much room, there's more room potentially for you being scammed because you're already giving them the money up front, because that's part of it. You give them the money and then they send it to you. So let's talk about this particular company. So this particular company is My Tiny Home Kit. They're based out of Australia. They're created in 2022, so not too long ago. They're created by an individual who is what I would consider to be like a serial entrepreneur, creates a lot of different businesses. Nothing wrong with that, but they're pretty well known in Australia, like we're in the news, that sort of thing. The particular marketing sort of strategy for this My Tiny Home Kit company was to sort of say it was like an affordable housing solution for Australia, which also has expensive housing, like similar to here in the US. But they also said they were going to sponsor a child for every home that they sold. So the story that's broke now, which was earlier this year, I came across an article from May of 2024, which talked about how almost 100 people basically paid for the homes, the kits themselves, and then they didn't get them back, or they got like a partial roof or frame. Some of them received refunds. So that's kind of where we're at with this particular story. The company has since been dissolved, so there's no website for us to sort of like walk through. So we're not going to go through the traditional website models agreement sort of test that we've used for different sort of like cases in the past, or different stories that have come up in the past. But I think it's really important to talk about because we do have product reviews. So we can take a look at some of those. So if you go on a website, you can check out their product reviews. Most of those have been 1-star reviews where they just talk about the nature of what they're saying is a scam and like why they feel like it's a scam. But there was also legal sort of action taken. So before the company was dissolved, there were enough complaints that it got the attention of Consumer Affairs in Victoria, in Australia. They were fined a couple grand, and a condition of that, I'm assuming a condition of it, was that they entered into something called an enforceable undertaking. So you can actually go to the website, links here in the video description, where you can take a look at this enforceable undertaking, which basically gave conditions for the company to issue refunds to people that have been affected, or deliver their home in a timely manner, to create a system for paying attention to complaints and sort of like logging those complaints as well too. So this is an interesting sort of like case, right? Because you have someone who did something, people gave them money, like, upwards of tens of thousands of dollars, like close to like 80K for some people. They didn't receive anything in return. And then people complained, and there was some sort of like legal action taken against them. Now, from my understanding, is that not everyone has received all their money back. Some people only received partial refunds. But I think it's worth talking about because, again, we're talking about an industry that's highly unregulated. It is global. So far, we've only talked about the United States. This is in Australia. And the main thing we want to figure out here is, how did this happen, right? So there's a couple ways that this happened. One, it's unregulated. We've already talked about that. So in this case, when we're looking back at sort of like this like chart, when you're breaking down the industry in these different sectors, the online space, I would argue, this is again my opinion, I would argue that the online side of it is even more risky than the other aspects of this highly unregulated industry, because you're already putting yourself at a disadvantage because you have to pay for it to get it. Now, the other aspect of how this happens is that we're used to it, right? So I don't have to ask to know that the majority of those of you who are watching this video have probably bought something on Amazon, right? You've probably bought something online. We've kind of been conditioned to give our money to online retailers with the sort of like understanding that we would get something back in return. Now, for those of you who have ever bought something online and got something back in not great condition, or you got the wrong item was sent, or you didn't get the item at all, maybe you're a little more skeptical. But for most of us, we see it as normal. We see it as normal to buy things online and then have those things delivered to our home. Now, I think it's a little bit different scale when you're talking about a house, but I want to know what you all think. So there's plenty of videos here on YouTube, so I'm not really going to go too in depth when it comes to like Amazon homes or like buying a house on Amazon, that sort of thing. People's ideas are split about that, but what makes my tiny home kit possible is the fact that you have retailers like Amazon, you have Home Depot, you have other places where you can buy tiny house plans you can take to a builder, you can buy kits that you can then build yourself or have a builder build for you. So this business model is sort of benefiting from the fact that we have much bigger names and bigger brands that we trust doing something similar. So every time we buy something online, we're taking a huge risk. But for this particular space in the tiny house market, I would say it's even more risky because you're entrusting someone with a lot more money. Now, personally, I didn't know, and maybe this is just me, I didn't realize that people were doing this. I didn't realize that people were giving someone like 40 or 50 or 60K to send, and then hoping that they would send them a tiny house kit in the mail or something like that. I didn't really realize the scale to which this was happening in terms of the price point. I was thinking more on the lower end, like for a couple of grand, maybe like 3 or 4 or 5K. I've seen stuff on Amazon for like maybe like 18,000, but I didn't know that you could give someone 60K to send you a kit to then build. So the whole thing is kind of really, in my mind, in some ways taking advantage of, again, which we've talked about, just how expensive housing is. So if you are looking at the traditional tiny house market, which we've talked about quite a bit on this channel, and you're seeing it growing and becoming more and more expensive, it's very attractive to you to then think, okay, well, I could pay this person 30K and get this home delivered to me. I can put it together, or I can have a contractor or builder put it together, versus spending $150,000. So as the tiny house industry as a whole continues to get more expensive, there's a good chance that we'll see more and more online tiny house companies coming up where they're selling kits instead. So what do you think? I thought this was a really interesting one just because of the online side of things. I think the legal side of things makes it interesting. They were actually fined. They were forced to sort of enter into a legally binding agreement saying, I will give people refunds, I will send them homes. Another condition of it was that they can't take orders for homes that they can't fill. So there was a little more of accountability there, but at the end of the day, there's still people left without the homes, the kits themselves left without, refunds. So it was like kind of solved the issue, but not all the way. What do you think? Do you think something similar is possible here in the US, where there would be some sort of like legal accountability built into the system where, for those of you who, have an experience and you want to file a complaint as it is right now, and you put it up on the BBB, but it honestly doesn't really do that much. It doesn't really guarantee that anything's going to happen. So what do you think? Do you think this is possible because it's a smaller place? Do you think just their legal system might be a little bit different, or maybe it's circulated through enough channels? Like, what are your thoughts on just practically, is there a way to avoid this one? So the other reason why, and this is sort of the last thing I'll talk about, the reason why I brought this one up and why I wanted to talk about this one is because I don't know how unavoidable this was. Like, I don't know if it would actually be possible for you to prevent yourself from being scammed in this situation, aside from just not buying it. So aside from just not buying a tiny home kit online, because that's a huge amount of risk, I really don't see a way where you could have avoided this particular situation. When they had like a good reputation, they were in the news for other things, they had other businesses, they had positive reviews for those businesses. How would you have avoided this particular situation? So I would say for sure this would count, in my opinion, as something where people are being taken advantage of. So this, in my opinion, this would be a scam. But the bigger piece of this is, what do we do to regulate this online side of tiny homes in the industry? And can you avoid this sort of situation from happening? So let me know what you think. Drop it in the comments. You can check everything out. Links to this particular case or particular story are here in the video. As always, I appreciate you guys so much for taking the time to watch things. If there's anything you want to see, anything like that, let me know. Drop it in the comments. And as always, don't think tiny, and I'll see you guys in the next one.